Three.
Hi, who are you and what do you do?
Don, I'm George Byres. I am a Vice President of Neutron Energy, and we are a privately held uranium exploration and development company. We're headquartered in Denver, but we have offices in Albuquerque, small one in Casper, Wyoming. And our goal is to develop uranium, bring it out of the ground so it can be used for nuclear power. That's what uranium is used for today.
Power where?
This would be for power in the USA. It could go worldwide once uranium comes out of the ground. There's no telling where it might end up, a particular pound, but today nearly 20%, 1/5 of all the lights in America are turned on by nuclear power. And this is a remarkable achievement for America. We lead the world in the terms of nuclear reactors, commercial nuclear reactors.
How many are there?
There are 104 which operate today in America. The closest one to New Mexico is just west of Phoenix. It's the largest nuclear plant in the USA. It's called the Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant. In fact, Public Service Company of New Mexico is part owner of that power plant, and I think something like 16% of the electricity used in America, or excuse me, used in New Mexico, comes from the Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant. So that's
Arizona.
That's 1/6 just across the state line to the west. Comes to New Mexico from nuclear power.
Why don't we have a power plant here?
Well, I don't know why you don't have one here. New Mexico's got coal-fired power plants, as you know, mainly in the Four Corners area, out west of Albuquerque along I-40 near Pruitt. To have a large, either coal-fired or nuclear power plant, one of the main things you need is water. You need a readily available source of water. So the two biggest power plants in New Mexico are on the north and south side of the San Juan River. They need the water to generate steam and for cooling. In Arizona, the water for the Palo Verde plant comes from the Colorado River.
Water there is also coming from Phoenix, I guess. They're reprocessing wastewater.
I don't know.
Understand.
I do. Okay, if you know that as a fact, then I'll accept. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that, but that makes
That's what's
perfectly good
interesting.
sense, and that's a very wise use of how to recycle water.
Where does the fuel for the power plant in Phoenix come from? New Mexico or
Right
someplace
now,
else?
right now, unfortunately, the fuel for America's 104 nuclear power plants primarily comes from inventory that the utilities that operate these plants bought back in the heyday of uranium mining in America and in fact in the world, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, very early 1980s. That's part of the real problem today. Today, America's utilities will burn between 55 and 60 million pounds of uranium each year. And the terrible number, it's a very scary number. America can produce, and in 2008, America produced only, I think, 3.9 million pounds of uranium domestically. So 3.9, that's probably 8% or less of the 55 to 60 million pounds that America's utilities require. We import something like 70% of the oil that we require, which means that we produce 30% domestically. We only produce 8%, 7 or 8% of the uranium we need for nuclear power domestically, and that makes, in my opinion, that 30% that of the oil we produce, that makes that almost a patriotic number, even though that is terribly that is terribly low. It ought to be increased a great deal. So where does the rest of the uranium come from? It comes from the inventory that the utilities built up back in the heyday of uranium mining in America, number one. And number two, this will be a very surprising number to a lot of people. About 40% of all of the uranium required for America's nuclear power plants today comes from former Russian nuclear warheads as part of a treaty between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in 1993. So that's about 24 million pounds of uranium that comes from what's called the it's known as the HEU, or High Enriched Uranium Treaty, or people call it the HEU deal. And the problem with the HEU deal is that it's a 20-year program. It expires in 2013, 1993 to 2013.
What happens then?
What happens then? We could renegotiate it. However, Vladimir Putin told President Bush about 18 months ago, no deal. We're not going to renegotiate it. And the reason is Russia doesn't need it for warheads. Russia wants to downblend that uranium for its own domestic commercial nuclear power program to generate electricity in Russia. So today, that's 24 additional million pounds of uranium per year that America's utilities are going to have to find somewhere. So you got 104 power plants in about 63 locations. 104 reactors in 63 locations throughout the country. You've got the regulatory bodies in those states are telling the utilities, you've got to find, because of energy security purposes, you need to find a secure domestic source of uranium, at least a larger portion of it than you do now.
That should be easy, though, isn't it?
It ought to be easy because
we know where it is.
We know where it is. America's got a great deal of uranium in the ground. New Mexico itself has probably got 600 million pounds that we know of in the ground.
What's the problem?
Just
open up the mines.
The problem has to do with the fact that after you had two disasters that happened kind of simultaneously. 3 Mile Island, where no one was hurt, and 3 Mile Island still operates, by the way, and Chernobyl in Russia. Those two accidents, coupled with the fact that the utilities realized we've really got all the uranium we need for a while, collapsed the market of uranium. In the early 1980s, when uranium was at its heyday, and when this industry had, you had 21,000 workers in the country, you had, I think, 26 uranium mills, you had 350 mines. Today, we are reduced to under 1,000 employees in the industry. We have only 6 mines, and we have only 1 operating uranium mill. In other words, we have 2 major components that we have to reconstruct in America. We have the physical infrastructure, the mines and the mills. And we have what I've told many people. I've told the New Mexico legislature this. I've told the Congress this. The more important thing we have to reconstruct is the intellectual infrastructure. You've got a generation of people that we have lost. In fact, more than a generation of professionals. Of chemists.
They went elsewhere, or they died, or
they passed on. Many have passed away. Some started a nice little restaurant chain in Wyoming called Sanford's.
Really?
Some have retired. Some are doing other things, and some are completely out of the business. Some have gone into the oil and gas industry, or mining for copper, or gold and silver, or moly, or something, and they've left the country. So you have to reconstruct the physical infrastructure, and you've got to reconstruct the intellectual infrastructure, the skilled labor. You've got to have the financial side, the mining engineers, the chemists, the health physicists. What it means And I think for the people listening to this, what it means for them and their students is that there is a huge opportunity in this industry as it starts to build back up. You'll need everything from accountants and lawyers on one side to mining engineers and geologists. You'll need basic skills like truck drivers, everything in between.
Equipment also, obviously.
Electrical engineers, mining engineers, health physicists, the people who keep things
But that
working.
takes time to develop.
It takes a great deal of time to
And interest
develop
and
that.
money. And does any part of the current stimulus package, cover the nuclear industry?
We were very excited in the fall and in November when there was talk of infrastructure being a major component.
During the campaign?
During the campaign and then following the election. The number I saw about 2 weeks ago was that something on the order of only 4 or 5% of the stimulus package is for infrastructure. I think a perfectly good use for some of that money would be to say help the industry in building several new uranium mills. We need a new state-of-the-art uranium mill in New Mexico. We need a couple here. We need one, say, on the western slope of Colorado. We need a couple in Wyoming.
How large are these places?
You would be talking about a facility that would cost anywhere from $125 to $175 million and employ probably 60 to 100 people, depending upon the size. But you have to have a mill, and what a mill does, it crushes the ore and
takes the ore and processes
through processes, chemical processes. The uranium oxide, the U3O8, the yellow cake, is extracted and separated. But those are absolutely essential facilities to help the industry restore itself.
Who would train those people to operate the mill?
The industry.
Where would they come from?
The industry is going to have to be responsible for doing that, but we're going to need help from the states. When I was
and the colleges also.
I now live in Denver, but I lived in New Mexico where you and I first met 30 years ago, and I was in the coal industry, and my company opened a large coal mine north of Grants called the Lee Ranch Mine. Mined our first coal in 1983, and this coal mine still operates today. It's operated by Peabody Energy. What we did there was we were lucky. We had the pick of the uranium industry unemployed who were starting to hit the unemployment lines. Today we would
have Grants and Gallup?
From the Grants and Gallup region, exactly. So what we would have to do today is go back in and retrain. There are still people there who've come to us and say, when are you guys going to get started again? Because we want to roll our sleeves up and get back to work again. There are those who oppose the uranium industry, and they say, well, there is no labor available for you, so why even think about this? You can't find the workers, just go away. The way I answer that is, well, when Intel came to New Mexico in the early 1970s, you didn't have any people in the whole state of New Mexico who knew what a chip fab was.
That's right.
When we lived in Albuquerque, the guy across the street managed the plant in Rio Rancho, and he was the guy. And they have what, 3,500 employees here now. They trained them. They brought them in and they trained them. So to say that people aren't willing to work particularly or to learn a new profession or trade or skill, particularly today with unemployment climbing as it is just a senseless argument. People want to work. People have a great deal of pride in themselves, and they want to improve and stand up on their own 2 feet and work.
And it clearly has impact on towns like Grants and Gallup, and even stretches to Albuquerque and the rest of the state because the extractive industries pay taxes, and every dollar earned probably by an employee goes through the economy, what, 5 times?
I'm not sure
6
of the
times?
exact number,
Something like
but
that,
you're
but-
exactly right. We were asked in late 2007 by Secretary of Economic Development, Fred Mondragon, and also the Legislative Finance Committee in Santa Fe asked the industry, the exploration and developing companies in New Mexico. They said, you need to do an economic impact study of what this industry that you're going to bring back in the state is going to mean economically. They were able to look ahead, and they knew in 2007, early 2008, that an economic downward spiral was beginning. They remembered back in the 70s and 80s that there were 7,500 to 8,000 employees in the Grants to Gallup area. Basic employees, probably the highest paid employees of any industry in the state. So they said, you need to take a look at doing an economic impact study that we can use as a tool to assist you. And they recommended New Mexico State University's Arrowhead Center. That is part of the School of Business Administration. It's a little for-profit unit down there. And what the industry did, each company developed its best guess economic scenario for doing its exploration, its construction, and then later on its reclamation and decommissioning of its facilities, and the operation phase in the middle there. We gave them to a third party who aggregated all of that data, sent it to the Arrowhead Center, and they produced a report in early summer of 2008, which showed that this industry is going to produce probably the direct, indirect, and induced jobs will be about 8,200 statewide, focused though along the I-40 corridor west of Albuquerque, and particularly Cibola and McKinley counties, that they would, I think the capital investment number was something like $3.2 billion, capital investment. And this is for construction of the mines and the mills, things like the substations, the offices, all of the basic infrastructure you're going to need to operate a major operation like that. So infrastructure capital investment would be something on the order of $3 billion, a little over. And the total annual economic impact was, I think, about $800 million a year. That was jobs, wages, salaries, the dollar turnover that you're talking about, the products bought, electricity, fuel, all of the goods and services needed to operate mills and mines, the chemicals and so forth.
It would completely change the economic complexion of that part of the state.
It would help it a great deal. It's probably one of the two most economically depressed regions of the state right now is that area between, from say Laguna over to the Arizona state line along I-40.
So why are people complaining or and not cheering this on?
I wish we knew the true answer. I think part of it has to do with the fact that you have, there's a fear of something called radiation. Radiation is something you can't see, so there's a fear of radiation.
Of the unknown.
Of the unknown. There is a memory of say, what happened in the mines, say, at the very end of World War II in the early 1950s, early 1960s. And there were, this was before you had agencies such as the U.S. The Bureau of Mines taking a look at this, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, Centers for Disease Control, and so on. They didn't understand fundamental things like how important was ventilation in an underground mine. Ventilation they had something they didn't understand, which was causing cancer in miners. That was radon. And miners smoked.
Smoking and radon.
Smoking and radon, the particulates from the cigarettes stayed in the lungs, and the radon
adhered
in the lungs, and that was one of the principal things. You go into a modern day underground uranium mine in other parts of the world, such as, say, Canada, and it's like you're walking into a hurricane. You have to literally lean into the wind from the ventilation that is sucking clean fresh air in and pulling it through the mines to ensure that radon levels are well below even the threshold. So those are certain. That's one example of the fear, I think. You have different population groups that complain. For instance, the Navajos will say, well, someone in my family worked at a mine and they had cancer. Well, Don, I'm in the uranium industry, but I had cancer 12 years ago, thanks to Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam. But had nothing to do with uranium. I'm still grinding along pretty well. There are other population groups, such as folks, say, at the Cebolleta land grant and the Wantafoya land grant on the east side of Mount Taylor, north of Laguna, north of the Laguna Pueblo, where the largest open pit uranium mine in the country once operated. And the folks at Cebolleta and Laguna worked in that mine, and they say, we're perfectly healthy. We want to open up. We want to reopen operations on our land grants. The Lagunas had an economic boom, in fact. They got over $60 million just from Kennecott, which they were allowed them to develop Laguna Construction, Laguna Industries. They became a very prosperous entity. They're one of the largest military contractors in Iraq. Laguna Industries is. People aren't aware of things like this. The folks at Cebolleta and Wantafoya would love that same opportunity to develop the natural resources on their land, on their private land, and make an economic activity happen so that they can support themselves. I mean, here are people who drive 60 or 80 miles into Albuquerque each day, back and forth, is climbing gas prices.
For employment.
For jobs. They drive over-the-road trucks. They would rather work at home on their land, mining their natural resources.
That's interesting. Is there a overlay if the population in the state approves of this strategy to expand operation, that sort of thing? What is the control that the federal government exerts? Can federal policy stop it, encourage it, or what?
Well, federal
take us
right now
through the process of getting this approved.
I was back in Washington 3 weeks ago. We met with the Assistant Secretary of Energy for Nuclear.
Who is that?
Do
you remember?
Okay, now you've asked
me
a
I'm sorry.
question.
No,
I'm drawing a blank
we
right
could
now.
fill it in after.
But they were describing the prior week the Secretary of Energy designate, Secretary Chu, who's now become approved.
He's a physicist.
He's a physicist from Lawrence Livermore National Lab. He was the director of the lab. They were just describing to us, they were extremely pleased because they said at his confirmation, which they watched, they said he was thrown some very tough pitches by both the Democrat and Republican members of the confirmation panel, the Senate Energy Committee, with respect to everything, but particularly with respect to nuclear power. And they said they couldn't have been happier with the way he answered the questions because the answers he gave clearly indicated his understanding that nuclear energy has to be a major component of this whole basket that we have for energy production in America. And there's nothing, solar and wind notwithstanding, we're just not there commercially. They are tax takers. They have to be subsidized a huge amount. Nuclear will pay taxes. And solar and wind cannot compete with the massive amounts of baseload power that nuclear can generate. What baseload power is when you wake up in the middle of the night and you got to have a glass of milk, and you go and you open your refrigerator and you find, well, my refrigerator has been running all night long. And the light comes on when that refrigerator opens, or when your garage door, when you hit the switch in your car and your garage door opens.
Day or night.
It's that power that's readily there 24/7. It is always available in this country. You go to somewhere like underdeveloped countries throughout the world, and you're not going to have reliable, always available baseload power. Wind doesn't blow all the time. Solar, the sun doesn't shine at night, and so forth. Nuclear power is there 24/7, and that's what baseload power is all about. But the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Mr. Chu, has said we've got to have nuclear as one of the principal components. It's 20%. Coal is right at 50 to 51%. Oil is in the mix. I've forgotten that number. I think hydroelectric is like
somewhere teeny.
Is somewhere like 13% maybe. But hydro is focused in only two parts of the country: the Tennessee Valley Authority area and the Pacific Northwest. You don't have. New Mexico doesn't have hydroelectric power, except maybe a little bit, maybe at
There's a tiny hydro power plant at TRC, Elephant Butte, that powers the lights on the dam.
Okay, well,
that's about it.
But you go to places like Florida, you don't have mountains and steep canyons where you can dam them up and generate hydro. However, Florida is one of the leading nuclear states. Louisiana, same thing, pretty flat, nuclear. Arkansas, same thing. Mississippi, same thing. Alabama, all through the southeast, you've got a large nuclear industry.
Most of our plants are old, though, now, aren't they? Nuclear plants? There hasn't been one built in a long time?
I think the last plant that was finished in America is called the South Texas plant along the South Texas coast, south of Houston. It began commercial operation in the early 1990s, and you're right. Nothing else has been built since then. That plant was in the mill. It was construction or design construction way back in the 70s into the 90s. So that was the last one built.
Isn't there an extra problem in that the oldest plants are probably getting extremely old, and old plants need to be replaced, and yet we need new plants also? So.
I think you are repeating a myth, and here's what I'm going to tell you about that. That is one of the arguments that there is an anti-nuclear component in the country who say these plants are getting old and let's just let them go away. As I mentioned, there are 104 active nuclear plants in America. Half of those have been relicensed. In other words, the utilities that operate them have taken a license for operating a nuclear power plant might fill this room we're sitting in. It's a thick document, thousands of pieces of paper. This is what the utility has to comply with.
Like the old coal studies that we saw.
Oh yeah,
shelves of.
But much more detail. Everything from how to operate, but in energy security and plant and physical security of that plant as well. Of those 104 operating nuclear power plants, nuclear reactors in the country, half have already been relicensed by the utilities. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has gone through it and said you are relicensed. The other half, all but one, and it's probably going to happen too, that last one, the other half have submitted relicensing applications, documents to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So these plants are going to be all good for another 20 to 30 years of operation.
That's a period of time for a license period?
That's correct.
And the technology's adequate still, and they're not in need of change, or are they upgraded constantly? Or?
Well, one of the things with respect to upgrading, and let me get back to that, but I've just had a thought here, and this goes to your teachers that are listening to this. This is where another job opportunity for their students lies. Get their students involved in physics, or have them take courses here at New Mexico Tech or other universities around the country which have programs in the nuclear fields, and or have them take a look, male or female students, have them take a look at something like Navy ROTC and get into the nuclear power program that the Navy offers.
Reactors on ships. Yeah.
Reactors on ships. The nuclear Navy.
How many of those are there?
Boy, I don't know. I don't know, but it's
most of the new Navy's nuclear, I guess. Certainly the
particularly the
big ships.
Well, the subs
submarines
and the aircraft carriers are.
Cruisers also, I guess.
We have a young man who lived across the street from us in Albuquerque. He went to El Dorado High. He went to the U.S. Naval Academy. Ended up on subs. He is now finishing an MBA, I believe, at Georgia Tech, and he is going to go to work in the nuclear power industry. He's got the world by the tail. A young man's name is Jason Padilla. He will do very well, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has lost, just like the industry, it saw its big staff retire. Yeah. And now they're drawing on the nuclear Navy to restaff. So you've got young men and women in the nuclear Navy who suddenly have a big job opportunity awaiting them. If they don't want to stay in the Navy, they can come back to work in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or better yet, if you don't want to work for the government, you can work for companies like Arizona Public Service Company or Duke Energy or the Southern Company, Florida Power and Light. You can work all around America in probably one of the safest industries around, which is nuclear power.
What about companies that build the stuff for a power plant? Are they American companies, or are they foreign companies now?
They are American companies, companies like GE and Westinghouse. Unfortunately, I think Westinghouse I believe has been, most of its nuclear piece has been bought by Toshiba of Japan. But you got other big companies around the world, such as Sumitomo, GE, Areva, Bechtel. These are significant worldwide, global leaders in manufacturing.
Who trains their people, personnel? I'm wondering where their kids go to school and learn about the industry.
They probably go to places like, I'll pull out it's not New Mexico Tech, but they may go to a place like Purdue.
Okay.
Or the University of Tennessee, or Mississippi State. You'll go to schools which have programs in manufacturing and nuclear combined, and the University of Mississippi. I'm a graduate of Ole Miss. They are developing a Center for Manufacturing Excellence there, and this is one of the activities they're going to be looking at. Has to do with energy.
Coming back to the issue of old plants and new plants, so there actually aren't old plants that need to be replaced, but there are going to be new plants that need to be built. How does our policy compare to other countries' policies in terms of nuclear energy?
I think we're seeing a change. For the last 25 years, almost 30 years, there's been probably a little more than a quarter of a century of hiatus in construction of new nuclear power plants in America. there were financial incentives in place for the nuclear power industry through December 31st of 2008, inducing those utilities to submit license applications for new power plants to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And as of December 31st, 2008, I believe 29 were submitted to the NRC. So it amounted to something like 29 truckloads of documents, environmental statements, and everything else that went into the NRC. And all of those are going to be gone through with a fine-tooth comb. I sat in on hearings in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, even back in the late 1990s. And utility executives were questioned by panel members, by committee members, about the need to build new nuclear power plants, and where will those new plants be built? And the response uniformly was, we know there's a problem. There will be a problem if we choose a new location, such as Limitar, New Mexico, or on the Rio Grandes.
Well, if you ask the people there, they'd probably want it there.
Well, but there might be a problem because people are going to say, well, we got to restudy all of this, and it's going to take longer, and we can't afford to take a lot of time. So where the new reactors are going to be built are going to be on the sites of existing reactors. And I'll give you another Mississippi example, since I know Mississippi. Between Vicksburg and Natchez on the Mississippi River, and if you remember, I said nuclear power plants need a lot of water. There's a lot of water in the Mississippi for cooling and for steam generation. There's a plant called Grand Gulf. It's operated by the Southern Company, part of Entergy Corporation, which is headquartered in New Orleans. Grand Gulf, it's in this little town of Port Gibson, Mississippi, and the people at Port Gibson have said, every single one, we want you guys to build here. We love it here. Our taxes are zero, thanks to the power plant paying all our property taxes. The jobs are great. The air is clean because nuclear is clean. You have high-paying jobs, skilled jobs, high-tech jobs, and safe jobs. If you're going to build another unit, we want it here. So build unit number 3 at Grand Gulf, and Entergy is looking at that very thing for that very reason. The site's already been studied. The site's been characterized. They know where. They know the wildlife. They know the air. They know the water issues. They know everything about that site, the vegetation. They've studied it to death. It's been studied since the late 1960s. So people at Port Gibson say, build another one here, because that'll mean more construction jobs, number one, and it'll mean more full-time, permanent operating jobs when this thing gets going.
These are career jobs, actually, because operation of a plant goes on for decades.
These are career jobs, and I'm looking for something here. I've got it someplace, but it has to do with jobs just in the uranium mining and milling sector. I got it in some of the papers I've got here, so I'm going to keep looking for that while you ask me some more questions.
So, for instance, APS in Phoenix, rather than build a new plant, would add a unit to the current APS, for instance, to expand its ability to create power. Because you're saying that the process is easier if you build where the plants are. And there are 29 applications, you said? How many of these are where plants are now?
As far as
expansion
I know,
projects.
as far as, I'm going to guess, but I'm going to say probably all. I'm not 100% sure, but almost all, if not all, are on sites with existing nuclear power plants, and it's because of the community and state acceptance. Where these plants are located, people really like them.
I recall APS when employs something like over 3,000 people
at
the
Palo
power
Verde.
plant. Yeah.
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised.
We were there And it was just a huge number and included everything from security to road maintenance to gardeners even to maintain grounds and that sort of thing.
Yep.
That was impressive. And almost all of those were career jobs. So would the same kind of thing apply to the mining industry?
The same
aspect
thing
of
would
it?
apply to mining. I've got a list of jobs here. This is, I'm going to read a list here
Yeah,
that we
yeah, please.
presented to the, there was an interim legislative committee on rural economic development and economic and rural development committee, and we presented this to them on August 7th last year in Gallup. Here are the types of jobs that high school students can look forward to having careers in if they want to get into this business. In uranium mining, electricians, geologists, plant operators, plant maintenance, diesel mechanics, mining engineers, radiation safety, industrial safety, safety managers, administration, accountants, human resources, maintenance superintendents, information technology, training. At the mill, you would have jobs such as in production superintendents, maintenance superintendents, technical managers, safety managers, office managers, accountants, administrative, human resources, chemists, engineers, again, things like information technology, environmental safety,
Right.
hydrologists, across the board, almost every job you can find you're gonna find it in the uranium mining and milling industry
And those
too.
all enhance what's called infrastructure for a region, a state, the country, I guess.
There would
Infills.
be some really neat spin-offs from jobs like this. Our company, when I got to know you, I was a coal miner, and later on our company evolved into a gold mining company. We had the land grant, the Santa Fe land grant. We merged with the Southern Pacific in 1983, and
Why did that happen, though? Why expand that way?
Well,
That's interesting.
Why we got out of the coal business was because the Palo Verde generating station showed up in Arizona, and we saw no market for expanded coal mining.
Because
so we
coal
said-
mining's only for power. Steam,
for the
fire coals.
southwestern U.S. and so we said, what else can we do? We want to grow our company. So we evolved. Peabody got the coal mine, and we took a hard look at the land grant we got from the Southern Pacific and the old Central Pacific, the Golden Spike Railroad through Nevada. And that is the heart of the gold industry in North America today, is northern Nevada. And we got lucky. We found gold in an area where there was little infrastructure. The towns were small, towns like Winnemucca and Battle Mountain. And we showed up there. One of the deposits we discovered is still operating today. It has produced going on 14 million ounces of gold. It's still got over 700 employees. It has had as much as like 1,200 employees at one time. Another mine about 25 miles south of there has about 450 employees. Well, you take those employees and you multiply them by a family size of 3.5 to 4, and then you've got that many people.
Right.
But miners are interesting folks and engineers, because many of them, in our case, had been and lived all over the world. One of our mine manager's wives was the daughter of a diplomat who had lived around the world. She had lived in Europe, and she had lived in places like Mexico, Mexico City. And she had an interest in dance. They had 3 little daughters. And they end up moving from Albuquerque to Winnemucca. And she shows up in Winnemucca, and she says, there's no dance program here for kids. And she began a dance program in about 1988 that still flourishes in Winnemucca, Nevada, in Humboldt County, northern Nevada,
Right.
for all the kids in this community. That's just one little bitty example of some really unique spin-offs that you're going to find. But you're going to find that one of our mine managers was an avid hunter and outdoorsman, and he got involved with the Wildlife Preservation Foundation, which became very active in northern Nevada, called the Nevada Chucker Foundation, and he insisted that our company become very involved financially with that. It promoted wildlife conservation, and it promoted safe hunting practices. But little things like that spin off from bringing in people who are highly skilled and highly motivated and very talented, and who've, in many cases, have lived in Australia, South America. One of our geologists was from Russia. He was a PhD from the University of Kiev. They've worked on all the continents, and they have a wealth of life experiences that they can bring to small communities.
The parallel here, there's an intriguing parallel, I think, in a small town in New Mexico in 1940 that became an important area. It was called Los Alamos, which was basically not terribly large. And if you compare what happened there then and now,
That's right.
Extraordinary. It's probably the highest concentration of PhDs anywhere in the world, I guess. But
I think you're right.
and they've got like 9,000 employees at the lab. What's interesting about that, does the story of coal link to uranium as in a negative way, in the sense that more nuclear power means fewer coal-fired power plants? Or do you see coal staying a constant because there's an energy need increase? What's going to happen?
I think we're going to see coal staying constant because it's going to have to stay constant. So coal now produces about 50% of America's baseload electricity. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we hope nuclear can stay at 20%, if not increase a little bit. But I think both are going to grow. I saw a number from the U.S. Energy Information Administration that says that by the year 2030, and that's only 21 years from now, right, we are going to have to produce another 30% baseload power in America.
Is that because of
to keep up
population increase, or
it's because of population increase and economic activity, and I think we all know economic activity is going to return. It's going to come back. So, but it's a combination of both of those: economic activity and population increase. That's just natural. But 30% more power is going to have to be generated in America from something just in 21 years.
Is there a sense that nuclear energy is neglected as part of the green technology revolution, or it's got a, because of the supposed taint of tied to it? Everything that seems to happen, it has zero carbon footprint, actually. It produces no carbon dioxide.
Nuclear produces no carbon footprint. You're
at
exactly
all.
Right.
But it's not included in what's commonly called green energy technologies.
Right now it's not, and it
Why
should
not?
be. I think probably it's not only because it's probably a political issue. It should be. We had an interesting presentation 2 weeks ago today in Santa Fe. Patrick Moore is the former co-founder of Greenpeace. Mm-hmm. Patrick Moore, I had a very interesting day or two with him because I picked him up at the Albuquerque airport, drove him to Santa Fe, drove him back the next day, and he spoke to the legislature and to the Mining Association at a dinner on February 10th, 2009. And the question you asked came up, and it was asked by, I believe, a gentleman representing BHP Coal, which is New Mexico's largest coal miner. They operate 3 mines: La Plata and San Juan and the Navajo mine out north and west of Farmington. So he said, how can coal and nuclear interreact? And the answer he gave was fascinating. He talked about the world's largest point source carbon emitting site is in South Africa, and it's a coal to liquids facility operated by Sasol. And the Sasol facility uses technology developed by the Nazis 60, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, during the embargo on South Africa because of apartheid, because no fuels, oil, gas, were able to be delivered to South Africa. So they said, out of necessity, let's do this. But to generate liquids from coal, 2/3 of the coal that goes into producing the liquids goes up into the air from the heat they have to generate to produce the liquid. 1/3. He said South Africa, Patrick Morse pointed out that South Africa is about to deploy the first pebble bed modular reactor.
What's that?
Which is a new generation nuclear reactor, which will provide a heat source for the coal, which will eliminate all of the carbon emissions, which will mean that 100% of that coal can then go into production of
liquid
coal to liquids
and synthetic oil.
Synthetic oil and gas. That's exactly right. So that's how nuclear can play a very unique role in totally
coal.
wiping out the carbon footprint from the world's largest point source carbon emitter.
What about the issue of waste products from nuclear reactors? Which is frequently brought up as a primary issue.
On the mining side, we're going to have very minimal ones, and they're all going to be easily taken care of.
What kind of waste products for mining?
They will be taken care of in our.
You end up with talus and.
Well, tailings from the milling operation are going to be done completely differently than they were done 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And this is one of the principal, you asked earlier about objections to the uranium mining and milling industry, and that's one of the reasons the industry 30 years ago, 40 years ago had a bad reputation, not just in New Mexico but elsewhere, because tailings then. That's the crushed waste rock that comes out of the mill or out of the mines, out of the mill. Back then, tailings were just placed on top of the ground. There were no liners.
What's a liner?
A liner would be a basin that is, you've got synthetic materials or clays or a combination of both that will prevent water from leaking in through the tailings and taking radioactive particles and material out through that tailings and perhaps putting it into the groundwater system.
So everything stays on site but contained.
Today we will never get a permit to build a mill and put a tailings facility in place unless we're going to demonstrate to the satisfaction of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the state of New Mexico that we've got a containment facility at these tailings, that they are engineered now, and we've got liners in place, we've got leak detection systems in place, we have a whole arsenal of means to ensure that no surface or groundwater contamination takes place. And on top of that, we will cover and revegetate. Now, we probably wouldn't revegetate because that puts roots in the ground, and then you'd have
more
some problems. But we would cover to prevent wind from blowing dust away from the site. So today, no tailings are ever going to be allowed to to be built up unless they're completely engineered and certified as safe.
Do they stay there forever, or what happens over time? Do they get back into the ground? Or?
They would be engineered to stay there forever. There could be provision in the mining operation to allow tailings and waste products to be put back into the underground mine workings. This is common elsewhere. It could be done today. And the engineering of tailings has evolved sort of like, in fact, all of mine safety has evolved a great deal. It has to, and the comparison I make, the analogy has to do with, well, we used to have hand crank phones, and now we've got handy dandy little cell phones that'll slip into your pocket, and you can talk to the whole world. And mine safety, ventilation in mines, the knowledge of clothing and everything else, and what do you do with tailings has evolved because of the demands worldwide as copper mines in Chile and Peru and Australia and New Guinea and uranium mines throughout the world have all developed. And the regulatory bodies in those countries have said we gotta do a better job with these tailings. We can't have damage from them. So today's and the mining industry we're going to develop in New Mexico for uranium will be able to benefit from all of that type of knowledge and learning that has been developed.
What happens to the processed ore then? How is that transported from here to a power plant? Does it reach its final process state here, or does it go elsewhere for more processing?
What you're asking about is what's called the nuclear fuel cycle. And the beginning of the cycle is mining. Ore comes out of the ground, goes through the mill, and through a chemical process, through a physical process, it's crushed. Through a chemical process, the uranium oxide, or the yellow cake, U3O8, is extracted. And it's a wet paste. It gets dried into a bright yellow powder.
It's called yellow cake?
It's called yellow cake. And this powder is put into 55-gallon drums, and the drum will probably weigh 800 to 900 pounds. The drums are placed on a flatbed truck because they're safe. Placed in a flatbed truck. The yellow cake is in liners inside and sealed inside the 55-gallon drum, placed on a flatbed truck, and the truck will either go to it'll go to Port Hope, Ontario, which is a town east of Toronto, or it will go to Metropolis, Illinois, which is in very southern Illinois on the Ohio River, where the yellow cake, the uranium oxide, is converted into a chemical called uranium hexafluoride. The chemical symbol is UF6. Then, and that is a paste, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But when you heat uranium hexafluoride up to about 140 degrees centigrade, you warm it gradually up to 140 degrees, you can begin a process to make the nuclear fuel. The important isotope is U-235, which is about 0.7% of what's in that U3O8.
So it's not terribly hot.
The other 99.3% is U-238. Right. So how do you separate the slightly lighter U-235 from the slightly heavier U-238? You do it two ways. You can put it through, I call it dinosaur technology. It's a gaseous diffusion plant. The gaseous diffusion plants are, there's only one left in America today. That's right across the river from Metropolis. It's in Paducah, Kentucky. It is one of America's biggest energy consuming locations, because it takes so much energy to push warmed uranium hexafluoride gas through a process to separate the U-235 from the U-238.
What's interesting is that there's a plant in Canada, so the Canadians are involved, obviously.
The Canadians are involved.
Do they get any of how many atomic power plants are there in Canada?
I do not know how many are in Canada, but they are principally in the eastern part of Canada, in the Ontario region.
So do they get paid by us to process the fuel, or do they get a cut of the fuel for their plants? Do you know that? What's the economics of it?
If the Don Wohlberg Uranium Company mines uranium, you've got a contract probably with, say, Duke Energy,
right,
in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Duke has said, okay, I want Wohlberg Mining to deliver to me 2 million pounds of uranium, and you'll have a price which will be set on the long-term contract price, which is today about $70 a pound. When that uranium leaves your operation, it's theirs. So Duke then is going to pay for the processing of, we've talked about the mining, and then you go through what's called conversion. Mining is number one. Conversion is the second step in the fuel cycle. Converting it, the yellow cake, the U3O8, to uranium hexafluoride, done at only 2 locations in the Western Hemisphere.
Right.
One's at Metropolis, Illinois, one's at Port Hope, Ontario. Then that uranium hexafluoride has to go through the third step, which is called enrichment. Enrichment can take place today in America in only 1 location.
Where?
And that is at Paducah, Kentucky, at a gaseous diffusion plant operated by U.S. Enrichment Corporation. USEC is the name of the company, U.S. Enrichment Corp. They did have a plant at Portsmouth, Ohio, and they had to shut it down in around 2001 or so for economic purposes, because these plants have they have terrible labor costs, and they are
extremely high,
and they are huge energy consumers to enrich uranium, to enrich the fuel and separate the U-235 from the U-238. But there's a better process, and it's called for enrichment, and that is called the gas centrifuge technology. And I was involved in 2002 and 3 with a very fulfilling and interesting project. It's under construction now in southeast New Mexico, in Lee County, south of Hobbs. It's the Western Hemisphere's first gas centrifuge uranium enrichment plant. And I can be kind of cynical and say, well, gee, the Iranians have it. Why shouldn't America? But this is technology. The technology is shared by 3 countries, by West Germany, or by Germany today, Germany, Holland, and the United Kingdom. And the company is called Urenco, and Urenco has partnered with 3 American utilities, with Exelon, Entergy, and Duke, to build America's first gas centrifuge facility.
Why'd they pick Hobbs, though?
Why'd they pick Hobbs? Because they had a willing community ready to accept it.
It's an oil community, though, isn't it?
It's an oil and gas community, but it's a very understanding and patriotic part of America down there. They said, "Bring it on! We can do this. We don't have trained workers, but we can train them." And just last summer, they had 1,600 employees in construction at this gas centrifuge uranium plant. But let me get back to enrichment. The key about centrifuge technology is it uses only about 2% of the energy to separate the isotopes U-235 from U-238 that gaseous diffusion technology uses. So that gives us 3 steps: mining, conversion to uranium hexafluoride, and then enrichment. From say Hobbs, New Mexico, or Portsmouth, or Paducah, Kentucky, the enriched uranium hexafluoride is now called LEU, low enriched uranium. And it is taken to a facility, I believe, in Virginia, where fuel is fabricated into fuel pellets. So you've got fabrication as the fourth step into fuel pellets.
What are these pellets like? Or?
They're probably the size of the tip of your little finger. They will weigh about, a typical fuel pellet will weigh a sixth of an ounce, something like that. But they're pretty powerful. I'll get into some of that. I'll get into some of that later. But then the fuel pellets are fabricated then into fuel rods and into assemblies that can go into the various reactors. And you probably want to get someone from the nuclear power industry to talk about this, but all reactors in America aren't the same. We need probably more standardization. So fuel might have to be enriched anywhere from 3.5% up to say 5%, depending upon the type of reactor that it's going into.
And then the pellets are stacked into rods, and that's what's transported again?
They're transported
so there are all
again.
these steps going on.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of work involved in getting it out of the ground as uranium ore to putting it into a nuclear power plant. And you had asked about waste, and probably the question you really were getting to has to do with the high-level waste that comes.
Different waste elements, I guess. There's high-level, low-level. There's the waste of the fuel process itself in the end. Then everything that comes in contact with that over time. Everything, I guess, from jackets and towels or whatever, glassware. Where does all that go in the end?
I think the jackets and towels and the glassware, most of that will go to a facility in southeast New Mexico.
New Mexico again. So.
Yeah, here we go, New Mexico, southeast New Mexico. This is WIP, Waste Isolation Pilot Project, which opened in when, mid-1990s, late 1990s?
Open for operations, yeah. I think so. I'm not positive we could receive materials from places.
Waste such as that.
Yeah. That's the low-level stuff.
That's low-level waste. So we've got the low-level waste like that, which goes to WIP. You've got tailings at the mills in the form of piles of crushed rock. Then you've got the high-level waste from the spent fuel. And it's interesting how America has failed again to take advantage, and you've got other countries around the world which have leaped ahead of America.
For instance?
France, Russia, China, for instance, and Japan.
Competitors of ours.
Our competitors. France, for instance, generates over 80% of its baseload electricity.
80% of their
Over
power.
80% of its baseload electricity comes from nuclear power. People make a lot of fun of the French, but the French are, I think, thumbing their noses at us because they've taken nuclear power and they've run with it, and they're perfectly content with it. Probably the best all-around nuclear company in the world is Areva Corporation, which is it's a parastatal company, partially owned by the French government. Areva just announced that it's going to build a gas centrifuge enrichment plant, and they are going to partner with Urenco. And again, Urenco is the one-third owned by the UK, Germany, and Holland. And Areva and Urenco will build America's second gas centrifuge enrichment plant in Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Why aren't our companies doing these things? American companies.
I don't know the complete answer to that, but it's probably as much political will as anything else. The French found themselves we're a country that doesn't have a lot of coal. We do have hydropower, but we can't build any more dams. We've run out of places to dam up. We don't have a lot of domestic oil and gas unless we get unless we go across to Algeria, our former colony, and get it from there. So what do? And we'll go to nuclear power. But what do the French and the Chinese and the Russians do, and the Japanese do with their spent fuel? They reprocess it. Spent high-level fuel rod, once it has had its life of several years in a reactor, it has to be replaced. But that spent fuel, when it comes out, still has 90 to 95% of the original energy left in it. That's why it's called high-level waste. That's why it's got to be treated very carefully. In America, what do? We store that. We store that spent fuel, those spent fuel rods, at the 63, I think, locations where the 104 reactors exist in America. We store them in pools of water, carefully engineered, contained, safe pools of water, but that's where we store them. The French and the others reprocess this uranium, and America was going to begin a reprocessing program, but in 1977 or 8, President Carter turned thumbs down on it. There was a concern about proliferation, nuclear proliferation, and which has not been, those concerns, those fears have never been borne out. The French reprocess, the Russians reprocess. In other words, you can take that fuel rod and you can regenerate it many times, 10 to 20 more times to get all of the energy out.
So there's hardly any waste then, actually,
out of that spent fuel. You'll have to talk to a health physicist to find out what's left at the end, but I don't know the answer to that one.
It's obviously less than you
It's much less. America began 2 years ago to take a hard look at reprocessing. They held scoping studies for siting America's first reprocessing facility. They did hold scoping studies in New Mexico. One, I believe, at Carlsbad. Maybe it was either Hobbs or Roswell, and the third was at Los Alamos. That was 2 years ago, and I think that program has kind of come to a slow halt right now. But it's certainly a program which has proven itself in other countries, and it needs to be looked at in America.
Where are the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Japanese, the Swedes and Danes getting their ore from, or their fuel from, yellow cake from?
These people are probably getting, the French, for instance, Areva, they go to the Francophone countries in West Africa, principally Niger, and Areva has operations in Niger. Niger is a major producer. The world's largest uranium producer right now is Australia. The second largest producer is our friends to the north, Canada, which has the highest grade ore in the world. And I'll tell you a little anecdote here. Uranium ore in New Mexico, if we have ore that is 0.2%, that's high grade. I have seen and read of intercepts in Canada which are over 56%. Which are, we're talking,
that's more than
we're
high
talking
grade.
280 times the grade of New Mexico ore. Ore is mined in Canada that's in the 20% range. It has to be mined robotically. This is underground, but mined robotically, and it's mined safely, and it's mined commercially. But the principal producers are Australia, Canada. The third producer in the world, the third largest, has come out of nowhere in the last 10 years, and that's Kazakhstan, one of the former Soviet republics. Kazakhstan in the 1990s was producing probably about 1 million to 2 million pounds of uranium per year. In 2008, I believe Kazakhstan will come in at like 19 million pounds a year. I just talked to a friend last week whose company is producing in Kazakhstan, and he said there are probably around 20 to 25,000. He had a rough number, 20 to 25,000 employees in the industry in Kazakhstan. And all of the Kazakh operations are in situ recovery. In other
What's
words,
that mean?
It's not conventional mining. In situ recovery, you're injecting groundwater back into the ground. You're fortifying that water with either oxygen or essentially bicarbonate of soda. In some cases, and in Kazakhstan it's the case, you're putting sulfuric acid into the water, and you are freeing the uranium from the deposits underground, bringing it up, bringing it back up in liquid form, and cleaning the uranium out of the water and using that water over and over and over again. This process is used in the U.S., in Texas, and in the Nebraska Panhandle, and in eastern Wyoming, which is where the only in situ operations in America are, and where essentially all of America's uranium production occurs today. But you've got Australia, Canada, Kazakhstan, Niger are producers. Other countries that produce uranium are Namibia and South Africa. Uzbekistan is a producer, but
what about China?
China is developing its own production. Russia has production as well. But there are problems with these other countries which are producers. You said, where does this fuel come from that the other countries are getting their fuel from? And this gets back into the entire energy security picture for America. 20% of our baseload energy comes from nuclear power. And we've got to develop a secure domestic production capacity for at least more than this 4 or 5% that we produce today. Canada is being looked at, where we're going to get a substantial amount from Canada, but Canada is being looked at by the Chinese as they desperately grow their nuclear production capacity. They've got to get fuel, so they're looking at Canada. Australia, most of their uranium is now being spoken for because it's going to go to China. It's going to go to India, which is developing its nuclear capacity, and some Australian uranium is going to go to Russia as well. South Africa just announced last year we're not going to sell any more of our uranium on the world market because we're going to keep it for ourselves, because we're going to grow our domestic nuclear power capacity just as a matter of our own South African
so they don't have to
energy
import
security.
Oil or...
Niger, Areva is there. They get a great deal of their uranium from Niger. However, Areva's engineers and executives are being kidnapped and held hostage for ransom. You've got guerrilla attacks on their facilities. Namibia, they've had strikes. Australia's had problems with big hurricanes. The fires in southern Australia have not affected them because the production's in the north. Canada's production is hurt because so much of its production is, all of it essentially is underground, but it's in northern Saskatchewan. You've got a great deal of surface water and pretty much saturated underground workings. The largest mine in the world should be operating today, called Cigar Lake, but about 2 years ago they started to have water inflows before it began commercial production. This one mine, Cigar Lake, would have produced 18 million pounds of uranium a year, which is 1/10 of what the world consumes. The mine is now flooded. Cameco has announced that we're not going to know until at least 2011. We're not even going to know until 2011 when we can start production back. So even though Canada's got so much uranium, they have production problems because of just operating issues underground.
So the places like grants become important to us as a stable, opportunity for fuel.
Yes, they do. And uranium was
It becomes
produced
critical.
underground there very safely.
And for our country also, I suppose, for 100 whatever reactors need fuel.
This is a national security issue. It's an energy security issue for America, Don, and we need to take a look at the fact that you've got an industry. Our company, for instance, we've got a bunch of guys like me, and we've been involved in developing mines of all sorts: gold mines, coal mines, copper mines, uranium mines.
Tell us about your company a little bit. Yeah.
But we've done this around the world.
Right.
We tallied it up the other day among ourselves. We've created over 6,000 jobs that still exist. High-paid jobs, very skilled jobs.
Jobs that are careers.
Jobs that are careers, jobs that allow families to live in a stable location in one place. We've been able to do all of this, and today you've got a regulatory climate at the federal level and a regulatory climate, a new state mining act at the state level in New Mexico. You've got capable regulators, and we wish that we would be allowed to do our work the way we as professionals know we can do it, because we've got a very powerful regulatory and safety regime. We've trained miners, we've conducted operations that are safe and secure, and we can do it again. And today it has become an issue of true energy security for America that we do this right.
Okay, but tell us a little bit about your company. When did it start? What does it do? How many people are involved?
Okay, we're a small.
How did you get involved?
We are a small company, and today almost every company, we're called a uranium exploration and development company. Probably we would be termed a development company, because we've got 2 properties where we know from exploration work and development work done in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, we know where the uranium is. We know how much is there. In fact, on one of our properties called Marquez.
Where is that?
It's on the east side of Mount Taylor, north of Laguna Pueblo. It's on an old Spanish land grant that dates back to about 1705. They actually built a nuclear power plant called the Shoreham plant in Long Island for this uranium. And to make a long story short,
from Mount Taylor
the
to
plant
Long
was
Island.
built, but the uranium was never mined.
Never mind.
Long Island Lighting went bankrupt because the state of New York decided it didn't like the evacuation plan for the power plant, even though it was built on the east end of Long Island.
There's not a whole lot
There's
out there.
not, the only...
Next stop is England.
There's just ocean out there. But every pound of uranium is in the ground, and that's where our focus is. We have probably 250,000 acres of state of Wyoming state leases throughout Wyoming, in the Powder River Basin, in the Shirley Basin, in the Gas Hills of Wyoming, on the southwest flank of the Black Hills, and on the west side of Mount Taylor in the Ambrosia Lake District in New Mexico. And that Ambrosia Lake District was the largest producing uranium district in North America.
For how long?
From the late 1940s through the 1980s. So for a 40-year period, almost a 40-year period, you had 7,500 to 8,000 people, and it produced, I think, something like 360 million pounds of uranium.
How critical is our need for stable uranium sources? What's our deadline now? I mean, what's the timeline for crisis, do you think?
I think the timeline for crisis is something I can't tell you exactly, but I'll tell you why it is a crisis. It's because countries like South Korea and Japan and China and India and Taiwan,
Or
the
energy
United
hungry.
Kingdom,
Yeah.
France, are all, Brazil. These are countries that have decided we are going to have to go nuclear because we can no longer afford for two reasons. Expense, number one, well, maybe three reasons: national security, expense, and the whole carbon footprint, global climate change, global warming, all of which I don't buy into the man-made global warming argument, but it's there. And other countries are leaping ahead of us. We've got something like 440 nuclear power plants in the world. America has 104, about almost 25%. But you've got 440 worldwide. You've got countries looking at constructing another 240 or 220 in that range. They have either said we're going to do it or these plants are under construction already. 30 of those, 29 of those are U.S., but 220 to 240 are elsewhere in the world, and they're in some unusual places. One unusual place would be Qatar on the Persian Gulf, one of the Persian Gulf states. Qatar sits on the world's largest
oil reserve.
Well, it sits on the world's largest natural gas field.
Okay.
And so if these people are looking at nuclear, Saudi Arabia is looking at nuclear too. They are the world's largest oil producer, next door to Qatar. So if you got folks like this taking a hard look at nuclear and saying, we're going to go nuclear, what does that tell us? The problem is a real one. And as these other countries start to roll out their nuclear programs, the next thing they're going to be doing is getting in the marketplace for the fuel.
Right.
So they're going to come to companies like ours. We would prefer to sell to an American utility, but we're going to have to. We have to look at our economic well-being as a company
that
too.
the price of fuel will increase because there is a competition and there seems to be a limited amount of fuel.
There's a limited amount of fuel. You've got.
But does that impact the price of electricity generated by nuclear plants, which is competitive now, I guess?
Nuclear is probably the most competitive fuel. I think the price of a kilowatt hour generated by nuclear is like 1.7 cents per kilowatt hour. Coal is like little over 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So nuclear is 1/4 of the cost of coal. Hydro is next cheapest. I think natural gas is third, and then coal. Wind and solar are much greater because of the subsidies that we're going to pay. We're not going to see it, but they're going to come out of our pocketbook through taxes.
And they're not 24/7 either.
They're not 24/7 either. Well, let me go back into the whole global picture. You've got worldwide uranium production of about 104 million pounds a year. You've got worldwide demand of about 180 to 185 million pounds a year. The price jumped up in 2007 of uranium to over $136 a pound. It has collapsed back to about $48 a pound today.
Why do you think?
But this is what distinguishes uranium. It's really weird. When the price went up, production didn't climb. Production actually fell about 4 million pounds a year globally from 2007 until now because of the difficulty in getting permitting for doing exploration in New Mexico, like we need to do to produce bankable documents that will allow investors to give us money where they can expect a reasonable return on their investment, to to the difficulty in finding mineable quantities of uranium.
And
but New Mexico's
transportable
got
also, I
those
guess, too.
mineable quantities
Right.
of uranium.
And you've got to transport it also. So in places like Niger, there's obviously a safety issue, transport issue. Safety is probably as important as transport right now, I guess. There, but
well, safety is, and
North Africa
that was
also,
the
too.
issue with Niger, because they're having folks kidnapped and held for ransom over there. But the other part of it is the rest of the world is going nuclear because it's energy security and its jobs. The Japanese, when we visited in Washington with DOE 3 weeks ago, they said next week the Japanese are coming to talk to the Obama administration about nuclear, because they call it the Trinity. And the Japanese, when the Japanese mean the Trinity, what they are talking about is energy security, number one, the economic activity that flows out of the whole nuclear fuel cycle, the mining, the conversion, the enrichment, fabrication, and the nuclear power itself. And the third leg on the Trinity has to do with the whole issue of climate and warming and carbon footprint. All of that rolled into one. So the Japanese are calling this the Trinity, and they believe in it. And Japan's a very interesting case, because they are a country which, aside from a little bit of coal, they've got to import all of their energy needs.
The other irony with Japan going nuclear is obviously the war issue, World War II. And in spite of being the only country that's ever felt the impact of nuclear weapons, they still see the energy side of it as being absolutely imperative.
They've embraced it because it is economic security and energy security to
and they're also
the nation.
Career-oriented, in that they like people to work in a career forever and ever, and that's probably part of the Japanese mentality also.
I hadn't thought about that, but
because when you work for a Japanese company, you're basically guaranteed a job forever.
I hadn't thought about that, but I think you're onto something very important, and that might be also why the Chinese are looking at it that way. But they are also they've thrown politics aside, and they're taking a look at what is in the long-term best interests of our whole country.
India also, I think, too. There's a huge population.
India is looking at nuclear. Today you've got 30 countries that generate nuclear power. You have an additional 50 that are looking at or have under construction nuclear power plants. And
so it's 80 countries, 80 nations.
You have a total of
30,
80 nations that either are nuclear or
plan to,
or are going nuclear. And a couple of interesting things have happened in Europe recently. Last summer, Gordon Brown, British Prime Minister, commissioned the beginning of work on 8 new nuclear power plants.
8
for England. 8. Angela Merkel is the new German Prime Minister, and she had a quote. I think she said, "It will be impossible to deal with climate change without nuclear." She has, in 1990 or so, the German Parliament voted to phase out nuclear power by 2015 or 2020.
Right.
They have 17 nuclear power plants. And the Greens in Germany clamored for this, and so the German Parliament knuckled under 15 or 20 years ago. Now they have wiped that out. They said we're going to keep those plants because it's impossible to meet our goals without them. There's a gentleman named Ivo de Boer. He's Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. He was quoted last week. He said, "I've never seen a credible scenario for reducing emissions that do not include nuclear energy." and I believe it was Denmark a couple of weeks ago, has done the same thing that Germany. They said we're going to have to go nuclear. And the Russians themselves, when you're talking about overall energy security, the Russians in their geopolitical toying with Western Europe over natural gas triggered something about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Fighting with the Ukraine,
Yeah, that's right.
their disagreement there, most of Russian, most of Western Europe's natural gas used to come out of the North Sea. Now that's declining
Right.
drastically. Russia has become the principal natural gas supplier to Western Europe. It goes through the Ukraine, and the pipelines do.
Right.
And Russia cut off natural gas to Ukraine, thus to Western Europe. And 7 countries, Spain, Italy, Greece, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and one other, decided we're going to dust off our nuclear power plans with that action by Russia just within the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think the Bulgarians had a plant they had shut down. It's not one you want to turn back on again, and they threatened to turn that one back on again.
So
this is
assumes
how serious
geopolitical impacts as well, because
it's very serious.
it's crucial
issue.
to independence of countries. Because if you need energy from Russia, you're going to bend probably to their demands or be.
And again, Russia produces its own uranium.
Right.
It is buying uranium from Kazakhstan, and it has these warheads, which it has been shipping to America for downblending as part of
And that stops
the
soon, you're
HE.
saying. Yeah.
That stops in 2013. That's
Yeah.
going to give them another 24 million pounds
Yeah.
of uranium each year that they can use for themselves.
So for us, that deadline is actually crucial to get something else online, because it's not likely that the Russians will be as understanding and to extend the treaty, I would think. Not now, anyway. But
I think that treaty is done for. Yeah, it will exist for 2013, and then it's over.
okay. What do you think the outlook actually is for New Mexico being a key player in a realistic sense with the present climate here in the state and the legislature and the
I would hope.
government?
I would hope that the industry has worked very hard. There's 6 or 7 companies. We have a little group of ourselves. We have an executive director. We have tried very hard to educate the New Mexico executive branch and the legislative branch. We work with the regulators. We want the chance to demonstrate that the industry we've got today is a far cry from the industry that existed just 25 years ago. It's evolved a great deal with respect to the way we train, the safety practices, the new technologies. How do we mill? What do we do with the tailings? It's all gone, just like from the hand crank phone to the cell phones that we all use today. So we want that ability. There are some significant people we believe, in the executive branch that get it. We want the governor to really say this is an industry that can help this state economically. He's a former Secretary of Energy, so I think he understands nuclear power's strength and its importance and its criticality to America's economy and to America's energy independence.
UN experience sort of give him a grasp of the world politics.
That as well. The economic secretary Mondragon certainly understands what's going on here. Lieutenant Governor Denish has been extremely receptive. In fact, the centrifuge, the National Enrichment Facility, is being built in her home county, in Lee County. And she was very helpful in getting it brought into New Mexico. So we are hopeful. Part of the problem that the industry faces, we're sort of like many industries. I think if you're in the forest products industry, or if you're a widget manufacturer, or if you're in nuclear at any level, it has to do with education. And science education is so important, because we have been victims and seen where people will come up and say outrageous things, and we say that's just not true at all. So I think you go back to the school level, to grade school and the middle school and high school, a firm science background there is extremely helpful, because we note that the counter arguments against our industry generally come from those who have an educational
chasm.
So some sort of there's a gap there that needed to be filled, and it wasn't filled. Those with more understanding and knowledge feel pretty good, because they understand what we're trying to tell them.
Plus, also the pool of people to train, interested people to train, will come from those who are educated also. So
yes, they will.
Hopefully, for the industry. Tell us a little bit about you, where you come from, how come you ended up out here in New Mexico and then wandered off to gold mines. And
well,
all
I grew up in Mississippi. I was very lucky to live in a great little town. It's Oxford, Mississippi. The fellow at the end of the street was a guy named William Faulkner, who happened to have won the Nobel Prize in Literature. The little kids, we knew him. His childhood home was right across the street from where I grew up, and we kids knew him. I can go on and on about William Faulkner, but the University of Mississippi was campus was within walking distance, and
it's a famous school.
I went to school there. I tried to play baseball there. I got a degree in geology, and then came back after the Army. I got a ROTC commission.
You were in the Army when?
I was in the Army from 1969 through the end of '73. I was an airborne ranger. I jumped out of airplanes. I was an infantry officer in Vietnam. I came back to Ole Miss, got a master's. I got a good bit of work in geology, but I ended up getting a master's in, of all things, urban and regional planning. Spent a little time with the Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, Mississippi, when the Grand Gulf power plant nuclear plant was being built. Some of our neighbors and friends worked there for Bechtel Corporation. But moved to New Mexico in '76, my wife and I, and I worked for the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, for 2 years in the coal program.
Which office? Albuquerque office?
I worked in the Albuquerque district in the coal program. This was during the Jimmy Carter energy crisis.
The irony about Carter, of course, is that he was a nuclear engineer, I guess, in the Navy.
That's correct. That's part of the irony of this. But we had an energy crisis.
Right.
They had stopped the leasing of federal coal throughout the entire United States. And I came out to work on an interdisciplinary team to start the coal leasing program back up. And there I worked with some of the big players in the coal industry, the shippers like Santa Fe Railway, and the miners like Consolidation Coal and Peabody Energy, Salt River Project in Arizona, Arizona Public Service in New Mexico. But after a couple of years with the BLM, I was offered a job in public service companies, coal side of things. They were a miner back then, PNM was, at San Juan.
They operated, yeah, San Juan, and they also operated, they had some state leases too, I guess, didn't they?
We had federal and state leases. They operated the San Juan surface mine by the San Juan Generating Station, which is one of the largest surface mines in the country. Still is. It still operates. But And that's where I got to know you, because one of the issues was paleontology.
Fossils.
Fossils.
So I was the state fossil at the time.
That's right. You still, he's even
I still
older.
I'm older.
You're still the state fossil.
I'm the oldest state fossil.
But I was involved with permitting, getting permits. How do we open mines? I went to work later after 3 years with Santa Fe, and I stayed with them for 21 years. We had the land grant, the old railroad land grant that went across from the Rio Grande in New Mexico, all across northern New Mexico, northern Arizona to Needles, California. And we opened the Lee Ranch coal mine in I did the permitting.
Permitting is a complicated thing. It's a complicated event. It involves experts and panels and reviews and soil studies and archaeology and everything you can possibly
And it involves
documents, unbelievable.
Wildlife, vegetation.
Lawyers.
A lot of lawyers. And lawyers are very expensive, is one of the things we learned there. Yeah. But that coal mine got opened in 1983, and it still employs 310 people. And it Governor King of New Mexico came out to help us get it open.
Old Bruce King.
He was good friends with the people who own the ranch that the Lee family that the mine still operates on. The Secretary of Energy and Minerals at the time was a fellow named Paul Biederman. A great guy. He was a lawyer, but he was a good lawyer. And he came out and he said, Paul grew up in Brooklyn.
Yeah, he was a New Yorker.
And he said, he looked around and we took him all over and he said, this is a coal mine I can take home to my mother. So
meaning what?
We've never forgotten that. Meaning he liked the looks of that coal mine. Yeah. In fact, it was done so well, and this is what we're trying to tell people. The group I'm with, I wouldn't be with this little group at Neutron Energy unless I knew these folks, and I knew that they did things the right way, did them very well. We did Lee Ranch so well that the Federal Office of Surface Mining, which is the federal coal mining regulatory body, would take its inspectors out to the Lee Ranch mine and show them this is a coal mine that you need to understand because they do everything right here. See how they do stuff, and then take what you learn here, and then when you go to inspect other mines, remember what you saw here at Lee Ranch because they do it right. That's what we're going to do when we do uranium. But after Lee Ranch, and then one day they built the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, and we said, let's take a look at something else. And by then, the Santa Fe companies had merged with the Southern Pacific companies, and the whole goal was to put the two railroads together. But the Santa Fe and the Southern Pacific both had trucking companies, they had pipeline companies, timber companies, oil and gas companies, and they had all this land. And we became the largest landowner in America for a while with over 11 million acres of land. We own land that was equivalent in size to Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. And we had to manage all of that land. So having a degree in geology and having a degree then in
government experience
and land use planning
permitting.
Really came into use because we had on all that land, Arizona, New Mexico, we had been involved with creating the Grand Canyon National Park back at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, and creating the Petrified Forest National Park.
Arizona.
Chaco Canyon came out of part of our land, on through California, back across Nevada, the old Golden Spike country, all across there. We had a very historic piece of country. Butch and Cassidy used part of our land as a getaway when they robbed the bank in
Hole in the wall gang.
So it was quite historic. We found a gold mine on land where the Lone Tree mine, it's just south of Interstate 80, and the Donner Party, as we went back through a bunch of history in Nevada, we found the Donner Party had camped and had their big split up, their squabble, where they split into two parties.
Right.
Next to where we built our heap leach facility at the Lone Tree Mine, and that's their delay and their squabble ultimately led to the Donner Party disaster later that winter. So it was quite a historic little group we were with.
So how'd you end up back in uranium mining from everything else?
Newmont Mining bought Santa Fe in 1997, and making Newmont at the time the world's largest gold mining company.
Where did they operate also?
Their operations are pretty much throughout the world, but they wanted our land grant. They wanted Nevada, is what they wanted, because we were producing over 1 million ounces of gold a year in Nevada.
Gold closed at $940 an ounce yesterday or something?
It's higher than that. It was around $990.
$990?
Yeah.
So that's
it's a good thing to be in again. But some of us lost work. I ended up in the uranium industry at that point, and have been either in the business or a consultant to it ever since. Now I got my arm twisted by a bunch of guys I really respected. They said, we're going to do this one more time. Uranium's the place we're going to do it. We're going to try it in New Mexico and Wyoming, 2 states with lots of uranium. So I said, I like you, and I like your guys' history, the way you do things, so I'll be part of this. So here I am.
No, so what's interesting is that you spoke about careers, and you've actually had many careers, career paths, but they've been tied to mining industry, extractive industries, which for a large part of our country's background was part of the wealth that made our country, the extractive industries, and still bring to it in taxes and jobs some of the prosperity that we have. But the need for more education is paramount, because we've lost many of our school of mines. Many of those are gone now because of the hiatus and things, and we import things like steel and uranium ore from weapons elsewhere and this kind of thing. And in part, to turn things around, I think we've got to look at what made us great in the past and can keep us great in the future. But education is an important component of that, I think.
Well, the entire mining industry is vital, and I will speak. I wear a couple of other little volunteer hats. One of which, in 2009, I'm the 2009 president of the Northwest Mining Association, and it's a trade group that's been around since 1894, headquartered in Spokane, Washington, with members from Alaska through Western Canada, the U.S. Into Mexico, about 1,800 members, and everything from coal to hard rock. Hard rock meaning copper, gold, gold and silver, uranium, cobalt, moly, and so forth. I said moly because I have trouble saying molybdenum. But if you take a look at the strong economies in the world right now, Australia, Canada, they're the resource producing countries and continents, and they're going to have a neat event that's going to begin Saturday in Toronto. It runs every year. It's called PDA, the Prospectors and Developers Association of Canada, and it's about a week-long event. And it's astounding to go there, because companies go and have their little booths about here's who we are, because they're trying to get investment dollars. But so you'll have little bitty companies, you'll have the big companies, you have the biggest companies in the world. You will also have countries with trade booths there. And you will have resource-rich third world countries. And the reason, and I'm talking about, say, a company like Mali or Ecuador. Let's just take a couple. Nicaragua. 3. And they have booths there. And the reason they are there is they're there with their country's economic people, and they've got maps, and they will say, our country has copper, gold, uranium, cobalt, tungsten, iron ore, but we don't have the capacity in our country to develop these resources. We know that it's important to develop our economy, and we want to jumpstart our economies, and we know that natural resources are the way to do it. And we know that you companies, you guys from the US or from Canada or the UK or Australia, you've got the best scientists in the world, the best geologists, the best engineers, you got the best environmental people in the world. And we know that the jobs you will bring us are highly skilled and very safe, and they pay very well.
Well paid.
And we know, the third thing we know is that your industry brings enormous capital investment, all of which we can use to spin and roll and grow, jumpstart our economies. So you go and you see these little economically underdeveloped countries pleading, come into our country. We want you to come and mine and produce our natural resources and put our people to work, teach us skills, yet we're finding difficulty in some places in America in getting that understanding. So we've got to educate regulators and executives, legislators, to understand that how important it is to have a domestic, a stable, very predictable domestic or regulatory climate where we can have a stable natural resource production industry of a variety of things, of oil and gas as well as hard minerals, coal and the metals as well.
And it's got an economic import as well. If you're stable, you have stable jobs, careers, and people. And communities, you can't all sell insurance to each other forever. To make things too.
And mining is really important for rural America.
Right.
It's always been that way. Mining and ag and timber, they're the real components and there's millions and millions of us who grew up in small towns that really like small towns, like a Socorro or an Oxford, Mississippi, or a Winnemucca, Nevada.
So, anyway, thank you. I think thank you for your time and effort. We appreciate it.
I enjoyed this.
This has been fun. I know it's fun. It's good. Thanks a lot, George.
You're welcome.
Hey, George.